Hey, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you. Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Um, yeah. So I don't know if you prefaced that a little bit. I think my stream was behind, but you want me to just jump right in?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so just a little bit of context. So I've kind of been going through the process of, for the anarchist dictionary, I'm looking at writing up some entries for that to kind of fill out the initial catalog of especially like a lot of these base level ideas. And I kind of found myself in a position where I was trying to really pin down the underlying initial assumption, which this may be a controversial opinion in itself, but I've found that there is no philosophy that at some point doesn't have an initial assumption somewhere. I think it's not exactly like a groundbreaking opinion, but one that I've been tested on before. But I kind of went to two different places, one being significantly more deontological, and the other being teleological in their nature. But I'm leaning towards the categorical imperative and an acceptance of that being essentially the basis for all voluntarist philosophy from bottom to top. Right. The idea is that you should treat all actions as a universalizable maxim by which all people could and should follow, and that all individuals must be treated as an end within themselves, because you can build everything else from those 2 points as long as you can accept that from there. Does that make sense?
You can if you accept that, but you don't need to accept that. And you sidestep the whole guillotine by not accepting that. Um Again, this goes back to the conception of rights that I've been developing. You have a state of nature in which none of this applies. It's people thumping each other over the head to, steal the meat that they want or to maintain the territory that they want, with no conception of property and no conception of ethics or morality or any of this stuff. And then you have people that choose to reciprocate rights, sort of elevating themselves out of this state of nature. That's not a that's not accepting a categorical imperative. That's not saying you have an unconditional moral obligation binding on everyone, not dependent upon a person's oh, not dependent on a person's will. Um, it, that would be what most people would say, like objective ethics or objective morality would be a categorical imperative, which is this is just how it is, and it's this way because it is, which is not really an argument, right? There's nothing in nature that gives us the ought of behavior. Um, and it's unfortunate. Like, I would love to be the one developing the holy grail of philosophy, to quote Molyneux, and saying that I had found a secular proof of a rational proof of secular ethics. But I don't think that exists, and I haven't found it, and nobody that I know of has worked that out. How to connect A equals A to a categorical imperative? I don't think that exists. I haven't seen it. Not saying I wouldn't love to see it, but I haven't yet. Um, I don't think understanding what rights actually are and how they function just by being choices that we make to reciprocate respect for each other and for our property and our associations. That's not a categorical imperative. That's a recognition that there is no categorical imperative. And if we don't want to live like the lions and the bugs, if we want to live like rational, intelligent people that are elevated out of that world, we elevate ourselves through the use of these agreements by choosing to recognize property and to respect property, ours and others, through reciprocal agreements. So I wouldn't call that a categorical imperative. Did that answer you at all? Sorry if it didn't.
Yeah. So I guess where maybe I'm just losing the forest and all the trees, right? Maybe I'm looking into this perhaps even further than is necessary. But I think my like initial gut reaction, if I could challenge you on that a little bit, is that if you were to raise, so essentially that would be not so much raising, but kind of sidestepping to you're still one step above the state of nature, right? We're not like in the realm of utilitarianism where our initial maxim is like pleasure over pain or something, where you're there's multiple layers in between there that would require some form of justification, right? But I think once you start, can okay, how about this? Can we both agree that the concepts of universalizability and treating man as an end within itself are good things that are used to rationalize portions of the reciprocity of rights in voluntarism?
I think if you don't have universalizability, then you have inconsistency, which is anti-rational, which is the opposite of morals. That's the opposite of a moral framework. You're back down with the animals. Like if we're going to be inconsistent, like the act of thumping somebody to take their meat is the same thing as saying I get to hit you, but you don't get to hit me, and I get to use force to take what I want, but you don't. So it's just an inconsistent position. It's the same inconsistent position. So that's why it's important to, or it's an ununiversalizable position is another way of saying it. So like the universalizability, the ability for a rule to work in all places, all times, between all people, in all circumstances, should be the bar, and that's a should, not like a that should is not woven into the fabric of reality and isn't a categorical imperative. It's just if you value reason, then something that rises to the standards of reason should be what we're looking for when it comes to a rubric to govern behavior.
Yeah, and I think maybe I maybe should have prefaced this by saying that like I'm not a natural rights philosopher by any means. I don't believe in deontology as like a true explanation within itself with no initial assumption like Kant would say it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just if I were to put this concisely, I guess where I'm coming from is more the perspective that you can reach the same conclusion of rights while having the clear outlines of the first two formulations of the categorical imperative. And so at which point, so I guess at which, maybe this is a better question. Is it just a happy coincidence that the two happen to have so many similarities? Or yeah, maybe that's probably, I think maybe that's it. Maybe I'm just losing the forest and the trees kind of thing. But it just seems like there's so much overlap. Like treating man within an end of itself alone is a huge portion, or at least coincides directly with a lot of the rationalizations that we use for why someone should not be able to lord over another individual. They're exploiting them. They're using their freedom, their liberty, their body, whatever it may be, resources, as a means to an end, as opposed to an end within itself. And so I guess maybe it's just there's a lot of overlap between the two ideas. But
so I think a lot of philosophers throughout history have taken how morality has evolved from nature in beings, because that's definitely happened. Like morality has evolved as part of the species. People have an innate sense to a large degree of what is good and evil. Most people do. I don't think that's questionable. If you disagree, you can let me know. But and I'm trying to keep up with float, but it is killing my CPU. Yeah. I'm closing float. Sorry, float. Okay. So I think a lot of philosophers have tried to come up with equations that arrive at the same end, which is this universalizability. This man is his own end, and I think Kant did the same thing. He tried to find a way to get there, and I did too. I looked at when I was trying to define rights and how they function between people. I started by looking at how they function between people. And then I tried to find a way to describe that in a explicit way. Because I think other philosophers have tried to spirit from first principles or from God, or humanity. You know, what are the big three for natural rights? Rights come from humanity, God, or I forgot what the third one was. But anyway, they try and connect A to Z, Z being reciprocal rights, and I think they fail over and over and over. And rather than try and connect A to Z, for me, I just said, well, look, this is how they actually function. And then once we understand how they function, and I haven't seen many people really talk about it like that yet. I think somebody from, and this is me failing to do my homework, and it might even be JC in chat, and I'll get to your donation in a second. Somebody emailed me some resources of somebody else that has talked about rights in this way, and I still have not looked up those resources. So I might not be the first, and I'm not trying to be hubristic about this at all. I just might have come to somebody else first. But what are rights and who gets them? Step one, what should the rights on the list of rights that we reciprocate be? Step two, I think, for the first time we have the non-aggression principle as an idea, in a holistic idea that covers all situations. So it seems like we're at a place in history where we have the socket and the thing to fill it figured out, and we have it figured out in a way that is non-subjective and universalizable and doesn't make invalid inferences from nature and the universe to categorical imperatives. Am I rambling, or am I speaking to your point? I'm not sure at this point, so forgive me.
No, so this is interesting, and let me know if I'm taking up too much of your time. But so
I'm hanging out tonight. This is as long as I got fuel in the generator, this stream will continue.
Okay, you're looking at this from a teleological perspective, as in right. So I'll agree that we must at some point resign that all beings can act within the state of nature. I think that is the fundamental aspect of the state of nature, is that all things are part of the state of nature until they elevate themselves above that. I find that no one has come up with a counterpoint to that ever. All philosophies essentially account for this, right? And so whenever we're constructing this, how do I say this? Essentially, like, you have a teleological foundation as in a consequentialist foundation, or you have a deontological as in an assertion that this is the way reality is. And that's why I agree with your beginning of your point, where a lot of philosophers' biggest failings is that they try to skip the initial assumption. They try to solve philosophy, essentially, and say, like, okay, we can justify all of these things based off of this, and there's usually some hole somewhere, or an initial assumption that they accept as not an assumption. Like God is a great example.
Yeah, they just assert. They just assert. That's all of the natural law sources of morality are seem to come from assertions, and I haven't found proof of any of that yet. And I'm happy to be wrong, but yeah. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I completely agree with that, which is why I've kind of I don't even try to look for the non-assertion at this point. I would make the claim that I don't even know if it's possible, kind of like how I started with this, that there can be a philosophy without an initial assumption somewhere. So you're making the case that in the initial assumption in voluntarism, as you've kind of formulated it, is that, look, we exist in this state of nature. That is a reality that we can agree to, right? Which could be seen as like a deontological claim, but I think is a very rational one to make. But from there, it's almost we desire these outcomes for our own lives, which would be a consequentialist claim. So therefore, we should follow this rule of reciprocity for rights. Does that make any sense?
I don't know that I would call what I'm talking about a philosophy, because that implies connecting those dots. That implies bridging the divide. That implies the holy grail of philosophy. That implies I'm not doing any of that. I'm not starting with any assumptions other than the non. I don't know where my vocabulary has gone tonight. The is it solipsism? The non-solipsistic, like we exist. Like that's probably an assumption necessary to my conception of rights. The universe is objective and consistent. That is an assumption. So the law of the three laws of reason are required, definitely. Yeah. And those are assumptions. If you want to dive in, I don't care to dive into solipsism, but I mean those are technically assumptions. I don't think that I'm not claiming to have invented a holy grail of philosophy. I'm just saying like this is how this thing called rights functions in the real world, and we are all creatures that actually are in a state of nature, and we can choose to behave better if we want to, and if we can find other people that also want to. I don't know that deserves the label of a philosophy. Like maybe this is philosophy, maybe this is the only practical philosophy, but I don't know. If a lot of Molyneux's detractors made fun of him for using that whole, he's created the holy grail of philosophy. And I think that one guy, Woodard, Stephen, somebody, forgot his name, said that he hasn't even gotten out of bed, as an insult. Like Molyneux was claiming to, have bridged the Izot dichotomy, and, created a connected A equals A all the way to thou shalt not, excuse me. Sorry for burping on stream. Connected A equals A all the way to thou shalt not murder, which, he did not. Not without accepting a categorical imperative of sort of life, taking actions towards living. Anyway, so I guess I'm not trying to say that I have done that. Because I haven't, because I don't know that can be done. I'm just trying to piece together advice for human behavior. Well, I guess. Is that philosophy? I don't know.
Yeah, so don't feel bad about the vocabulary thing, by the way, because I'm a couple Bud Lights deep myself through this dark winter. So, but I mean, I wanted to say that it's funny that you said that, because I was thinking it, but I didn't want to like come off as insulting you. But I was going to say like it sounds inherently unphilosophical. Like, there's obviously an ethical code in there. So I won't say go as far as to say, unethical or anti-ethics perhaps, but there is sort of like a resignment to, like, dare I say, almost like a deontological unknowable, like the fact that like, well, we can't really tie any of these things down to reality other than the fact that this is how, if you want these outcomes, this is the best way to achieve them, would be through this reciprocity of rights. And because we exist in a state of nature, if you don't want to follow these, then, well, I've told you my terms, essentially.
The more I think about it, the more I dislike the usage of deontological as a descriptor for my conception of rights. And I hate even calling it my conception of rights. Like, it's just an idea that I'm trying to work on with other people providing input. So, I don't think deontological fits, because it's not a this is how you should behave prescription. It is the this is how I will behave, and this is how I require people around me to behave. This is how I require. This is how. That's the way to say it. This is how I require the people around me to behave. That's not a deontological position. Like, that's just.
I'm sorry. I know I'm interrupting you, but I definitely misspoke there. I got my logicals mixed up. I meant to say epistemological, as in like as far as when I was saying the appeal.
That makes more sense now.
The unknowable. Yeah, I'm very sorry. Like I said, couple Bud Lights deep. So.
No, you good.
Yeah. So, but no, I understand where you're coming at it from now. Is it, if, we're going to, I hate using the same terms to mean different things, but like under the assumption that there is the inherent unknowable to like we cannot tie down an ethical code to like a hard is, then we're resigned to stating our terms as beings within the state of nature. We can elevate ourselves to those terms, and like I said, if you don't want to follow those terms, well, I've stated mine very clearly. Kind of approach. Does that maybe
Yeah.
clarify?
Yeah, and I'm not out here trying to be the next Aristotle. Like, I don't know that I could do that. I'm just trying to make the best rational arguments that I can. And luckily, if the universe is consistent and functions in a deterministic, rational way, and so it stands to reason that if we find a rubric for behavior that conforms to that conforms to the nature of reality, consistent and universalizable, then we probably stand to fare the best. But there's nothing that will make anybody behave in any way if they choose not to, and I have to accept that as well. So. Maybe I'm not doing philosophy. I kind of feel like I am, just not the kind of philosophy that the priests have tried to do for millennia. Like, I kind of feel like I'm doing philosophy. I kind of feel like this matters and that it's meaty and that it's well-reasoned and consistent and thought through. But if doing philosophy means defeating Hume's guillotine, then very few people have ever done philosophy, I guess is how I would say that.
Well, yeah.
if anybody.
Yeah, and like you said, I don't have any like big rejections to that idea as a concept. Like in terms of how I've talked about morality in the past, people can suit their morality as they see fit, as long as it doesn't contrast with my ethics, as far as like you can believe whatever morals you want. I'm basically about to say the same thing again, but I mean, yeah. So I would almost, and maybe this will be a little bit triggering, but I would almost go as far as to say like that is, I mean, it is an inherently consequentialist approach to how you have a very specific outcome that you want for your life, and you have these rules that are created in logic, and I think very well formulated, and have rational explanations for all of them, but still are tailored to the end outcome of, and this is how we can achieve that. Am I
Maybe you're using a different
that?
definition of consequentialist than I am, but I would hard disagree that it's a consequentialist position, because the consequences are not part of the equation.
So you wouldn't say that the formulation of your definition for what like rights isn't to inherently maximize those rights for the individual? That almost sounds like a dumb question to ask, but I feel like it's important to say, because like at the end of the day, the rule exists to maximize liberty. The rule does not exist because it is a truth in itself, right? So that would be a consequent. I mean, unless I'm missing something, that would make it a consequentialist idea, right?
My understanding of consequentialism, and we can, if Jim Jesus is still in the chat, he can correct me if I'm wrong, but it is that the rules governing behavior are determined by their expected consequences. So, like, the consequences are part of the equation. So, my equation doesn't say non-aggression principle because of outcome. It's just non-aggression principle. So, like, sometimes certainly by not aggressing, we end up worse off. So yeah. There are certainly examples where the consequences are poorer, flagpole scenarios and such. But yeah, and even in those scenarios, the consequences still have no bearing on the determined behavior. So to me, that's not consequentialism.
Well, yeah. Well, even in like, let's take like a blatantly consequentialist philosophy like hedonism. if you could call it, we'll call it by its proper name, utilitarianism, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have the idea that pleasure and pain should be maximized in all cases. Therefore, so you're making the argument that well, I don't want to say it like that, but you came upon, using logic and rational deduction, this idea of rights, and it's just so happened to coincide with maximizing liberty for the individual. Not that maximizing liberty for the individual was the goal when designing the conception of rights. Correct? Would that be fair?
I think so. I think I understood what you said. Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Well, I think I've taken up enough of your time. I
Oh,
definitely have some stuff. Oh, what's that?
no, go ahead. If you, I mean, I'm hanging out tonight, so if you have something else you want to chat about, go for it.
No, I mean, I think we've pretty much covered everything on that topic. Yeah. So if somebody else wants to get into Skype or something, I just wanted to say that all of your U.S. dollars stored digitally in banks are not property. So just let that one wiggle into your brain a little bit. But
Oh no,
yeah.
I already agree. There's no wiggling necessary.
Well, everybody else in the comments, then they could let that one inch their way into their brain. But yeah, I think that's it. I think this was an interesting conversation. I definitely have some stuff to think about as far as my write up on voluntarism now.
Kick ass.
It's
I look
very,
forward to seeing what comes of it. Take it easy, man.
yeah,
Talk to you soon.
you too. Bye.